color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day. While the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor, he was telling you to build your own house.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. Today is Malcolm X's birthday. And that, if anybody's been watching shows over the year, I used to play this in the early years every week. You know, this is my hero. I think he's a hero of black people, Malcolm X himself. And Malcolm, like all of us, went through a transformation. You know, like we all grow, and Malcolm in the beginning was anti. What was Malcolm like in the beginning in comparison to what he turned out in the end? What lessons he learned, and what lessons did he teach us? Leroy?
Well, that's a great question for everyone to pursue the answers to, because, quote, in the beginning, his beginning didn't start in the Nation of Islam. His beginning started with his childhood coming up, and then his adult life, as we understand it, was one of hustling and everything that goes along with hustling on the street. Mm-hmm. Then he goes to prison, and his family, sister and brother, one of his brothers, as I understand it, they introduced him to the possibility of coming into the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam, having been a member myself since 1966, mm-hmm. The Nation of Islam is not a matter of coming into the Nation of Islam, it's a matter of coming into a body of knowledge mm-hmm. that, for the most instances, creates a change in the individual. The change is not down, the change is moving up. Mm-hmm. In fact, the change is taking off the chains, C-H-A-I-N-S, from the mind mm-hmm. and freeing the black man and woman. As you heard Ozzie Davis, he said the real driving motive was our love, our wanting to be loved by right. white people.
Right.
And prior to that, you heard Malcolm say, who taught you to hate yourself?
That's right.
Who taught you to hate your nose? Mm. And these are things that we go, Brother Leroy would take a bath and put Clorox in the water. And I would soak till my, up here, because I wanted to be lighter. That's Brother Leroy. That ain't no confession.
Did you actually do that?
Say what?
You actually did that?
I ain't making up this story, I'm telling you. And then I would come out of the bathroom, I'd come out and look in the mirror and see, I said, wow, you know, that ain't work. But anyway, I'm telling you, see, what happens is I consider myself a little bit sane mm-hmm. today, but that's the craziness that happens to us. And when we don't pay attention to our women and applaud our women and compliment them on their hair, on their looks, and we don't get Playboy magazine, I'm going back in time now, I'm talking about our generation, Playboy magazine, and be looking at Playboy magazine and somebody's in Playboy who has silicone in them, and you got the real person back there in the kitchen
all
fixing
turned
food
around.
for you and your babies. The black woman, anyway, I ain't got to say that she's the baddest on the planet.
We're talking about the brainwash of the 50s.
The brainwashing
of the 50s.
impacts on our women, and then, you know, it's passed on to our children. The women,
No,
if you
I was just the opposite of you, Leroy. I always wanted to be darker.
I'm sorry.
I was always sitting in the sun trying to get darker. Because my mother was a pretty brown, you know, and I always loved her color. And everybody in my family, she was the darkest one, and she was the sweetest one. So everybody identified with her color. And, you know, that was a pretty color. I never understood why people had a color problem. Because everybody used to sit down on the beach and try to put suntan. It was tanning time.
Copper tone.
Copper tone. And the darker you got, the white people look great brown. Anybody white, I said, you should get a suntan. Get my color. And that's how I carried it out. It didn't bother me at all. And I was always trying to be darker than I was.
That's
You know, but that's
I do that now.
That's
I
the
love
old
the
Willie
sun.
Lynch syndrome.
Yeah.
When he talked to the plantation owners about the psychological damage
Oh, that's
that you
a
need
terrible
to do.
shot.
And he said if you get it in their
That's
heads,
The
it
one
becomes a
shot-
self-perpetuating
That's right.
modality. If you get it into the mind of the female, she'll teach it to her child. And he says if you do it right, it'll last in perpetuity.
That's right.
And we see that still flowing today when young brothers are killing each other.
Yeah.
I was at an anti-Klan rally years ago downtown, and the Bloods and the Crips were there. I said, I wish you guys could really understand who your enemy is. You're not his enemy, he's not your enemy. You don't have any turf, you don't own any land. You rent. You're renters. But you're killing each other, and the Klan is happy for the fact that you're eliminating one another. You're fulfilling their desires. And when the Klan showed up in Foley Square, both gangs ran the Klan out of town. And it was so good to see that that little talk got them to realize psychologically what was going on, which was manifesting in the physical destruction of each other. And what Malcolm said is true. Who taught you?
That's right.
Who taught you? And, you know, you were talking about our sisters with their hair, and everybody's going to buy hair from Chinese people and weaves and all this stuff. Sisters, let your hair grow. Eat good food. Stay away from fast food and all of the garbage. Come home, fix your meal. Have your yams, your pigeon peas, your rice, your collard greens. You know, cook your meal. Eat good food. What you eat feeds your hair.
Right.
And you can't eat garbage and look to have a good head of hair. Eat properly. Your body will be able to replenish itself, grow the hair, and you don't need weaves. There's nothing wrong. I remember when Melba Tolliver.
So, like, we've gone backwards.
Yeah, Melba Tolliver on ABC News back in the 60s. She stopped pressing her hair, and she wore an afro to work
Yeah.
one day.
Yeah.
And they were going after her for wearing an afro on
What
television.
year we're talking?
That was in the 60s, like
60s.
65, 66, you know. But
Flower
she was the
children.
first black woman I ever saw in New York on television with an afro. And she was a pioneer. So it's not about trying to look like somebody else. It's about being who you are.
Well, you know, the 60s brought in a whole new generation of liberal-minded people. Integration was in. I mean, I thought integration would work. I thought we would, really come together because in New York it was a completely different animal. But you see, I find that white people down south, once they discover, I mean, it happened to me in the service. A lot of people met me. I was a northerner, and I was the first black that they met up close, and I was equal to them because I was just as smart as them. I could shoot. They were surprised I could shoot a gun. It was amazing. I mean, I was the only black. The other two blacks, they were headed for the cooks. I was the only northerner and black. So I was in it. I was in the mix. I wound up being in front of the line. I came out of boot camp with a stripe. I mean, I was just gung-ho. But most of the crackers there were shocked. And all I had to do was put on an English accent, and they went, I have them all cracking up. Our name is Winston Gilchrist. And these crackers we sit down, and I have them in stitches. They never met a black man like, and it was fun for me, because these people were stupid as far as I'm concerned. And I had a good time in there, laughing at racism. And as a matter of fact, one of my best buddies had KKK carved on his wrist. And he said, this guy was from Florida. He had KKK carved on his wrist. And him and I became the best of buddies, drinking buddies. We go out, drink the ball games. There was Marines, how much can you drink? And we get to an arm wrestle. And all this crazy stuff. This is 1960, mind you. Mm-hmm. So before I got out of boot camp, and it was just at the start. This is April 1960, and the Freedom Rides had just started. And I'm out, and everybody's celebrating. I had a stripe on my arm. Out of 74 guys, there were 3 stripes given out. So I was one of the heroes. We were going celebrating with my buddies. We go into this place and try to get a beer. Just out of boot camp now, first beer, and nobody said anything to me. And my buddy said, come on, let's go someplace else. And I'm in uniform. I'm a Marine, mind you, just out of boot camp, and they refused to serve me. I wanted to tear the joint up.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, and that's what I was, welcome to racism. Of course, this is Carolinas, but I was just so amazed that they wouldn't serve me, and I was a Marine. And everybody else was proud that, we can. I had a stripe on my arm out of the Marine Corps boot camp. This is not unheard of. 3 out of 74.
There were black men in uniform, Army officers who were beaten to death in uniform in the South.
In the 40s?
In the late 40s.
Okay.
And even after the war, came home from the war and were killed in uniform for riding on a bus.
That's right.
So we really have to know the history, our history, and the history of this country, and not assume that because we had a black president that, boom, all of a sudden racism is gone, as NYU was trying to teach some of their students when Barack Obama was elected in what they call the post-racist America. But to consider the fact you serve your country in uniform. You couldn't go somewhere to get a cup of coffee
That was
in uniform.
1960.
1960, and I'm talking about the late 40s.
That was even worse.
When an Army captain is murdered. And there were black men who were beaten and killed for wearing the uniform. So we have to be cognizant of where we are and understand that the bloodline of those people is still alive in this country.
How do we relate that to the youth today? Yeah, we're talking from 80s. We're both 80 and you're early 70s.
Got a birthday coming up. Yeah.
You'll be, when's your birthday?
The 30th.
Of May?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, can't you tell them I'm a May baby, man?
May baby. No.
So how do you relate it to the youth of today?
Yeah, how do we, You know what I want to do? Since we're talking about Malcolm, I want to show Gil Noble talking about Malcolm. Because this was the imagery that we had coming up of what Malcolm was about and how Malcolm changed everybody. Wanting to be loved by the white man and all this other stuff we played in the beginning. Play item 2, and we'll be right back at you. All right? We got to update ourselves. You see what Biden's doing with the electric cars?
Yeah. Did you see that? Did you see the Chinese woman that designed?
My first inoculation was Dr. King. And then that led me to Adam Powell and a lot of the people. But I was put off by Malcolm X.
Why?
Because what he was saying and the way he was saying it was too blunt. It was dangerous. And you didn't say those things in those days. I told you, we had been socialized as kids to get around wrong, not to confront it. And Malcolm spoke in very declarative terms, and he said some terrible things about white people that we thought, but you would never express it, you see. He talked about the way this country was not a democracy, but a hypocrisy, and he talked about what had been happening to us down south and up south. And he was not shy. He had and he was very, very intimidating. I'm man enough to admit it. There are a lot of people who are my age who will speak, with love about Malcolm as though it had always been that way. But that's not so. He scared a lot of us to death. And then, mind you, I had this apartment, a bachelor apartment on Convent Avenue, and I'd been having a lot of fun, And here he comes talking about a different way of life. First of all, he dropped his last name. Well, we had been socialized to take great pride in our last name. The more European it sounded, the better. There was not a flinch about, Noble. Oh, that's wonderful. If it wasn't French enough, you'd put an ETT on it, to make it sound more French. And so here's a man who dropped his good last name and replaced it with an X. I thought the man was crazy. And then he talked about discipline. And he talked
Self-discipline?
Self-discipline. He said that we do not believe in drinking. And at the time I would have a taste. And he said that we don't smoke cigarettes with or without a label on them. And I would smoke, with a label.
Yes.
And he said, we don't eat pork. Well, I love me some ribs. And then he said, we don't fornicate.
Yes.
And so psychologically, I said, Malcolm, I'll see you later.
Yes.
And all. But what he was doing in deprecating whiteness, I came to understand later that he was rearranging the balance that we needed because we had glorified whiteness and deprecated blackness. And so he was tilting, using exaggerated terms, to give us a sense of self and to take whites down a little as they needed to be. And the discipline that he was talking about were things that we really needed to address. But I couldn't swallow that at the time. So jumping forward in time, a lot of things happened in the struggle, and Malcolm was struck down in '65, and I never went to hear him speak. My only impression of Malcolm was on the sound bites on the evening news. And if there was a rally in Harlem, where I'm living now, I'm living in Harlem, and he would have a rally 10 blocks away, I would go in the other direction.
Did he have a mosque there?
He had a mosque on 116th Street, and I didn't live too far away from there. But I went out of my way to avoid this man because I thought he was wrong. I had white.
I cut it off there. The reason why I play that is that that was the temperament in the 50s. I mean, you didn't join the nation until 66,
Right.
after Malcolm died. But, I was in the King mode. I thought integration would work. I thought the best way, I had Jewish friends at the time in the 60s. The integration was between Jews and blacks in the 60s, and you can see that by the peace marches and all that,
Right.
and especially here in New York, and in Manhattan in particular, in Harlem. We were really, I had a Jewish roommate, and we gave integrated parties in the 60s, talking about 65, the same year Malcolm was killed. But I was conditioned to believe that integration would work, and I saw it working. But then when Malcolm died, everything changed. I think the bus boycott, and I think that really changed things. The school, what do you guys think? I'm confused.
Well, integration
What
was more about
broke down the
economics.
integration? You see the 60s happening, Malcolm was killed, I think everything changed after Martin was killed, really. 68.
Yeah.
That's when everything, that blew my bubble. That's it. 68, after
Martin,
Martin,
Bobby,
then
and
Bobby.
Bobby.
After they killed Bobby, I was lost, man. I was so angry, I was ready to do it. Oh, man.
I often
But-
say that integration was about economics and not about the people. In the 1940s, during the war, my mother worked for the War Department in Washington. And there was a guy that had a restaurant, and he said, if a nigger came in his place and had a cup of coffee, he threw the cup away, broke it up and threw it away.
Where was this?
In Washington, 1940, 41.
Okay.
So my mother was an organizer. She got all the women from the typing pool. She said, ladies, we have a lunch date. And she took them to that restaurant. And they sat in there, and they got everybody they could get to come in there and order food. And they kept ordering food, and they kept hearing the dishes break, crash, 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 crash. And the man, with his anger, realized he didn't have a cup, a saucer, or a plate to put any food on. And my mother said, our mission is accomplished, let's go. So he had a restaurant, and he had nothing to serve the food on. There was no, there's no eBay or anybody to call. 1941, you have to make an order, call, and wait until it gets to you, all right? So he was shut down for a bit. I grew up in Brooklyn, in East New York, and East New York was a Jewish area.
Yeah.
And when I was in first grade, there was only one Puerto Rican family in East New York. Only one. The Catholic Church, two blocks from me, did not allow Italians in that church.
What year?
1950s,
50, the 50s, okay.
right? 1954, 55,
Okay.
Catholics could not go in that, Italians could not go in that church because they were not white.
Ooh,
All right?
in the 50s.
Jews lived with blacks because Jews were not white when they came here. The Irish had to live with blacks in Seneca Village here
Yeah, in the
because they were
1890s.
not white.
1890s.
So the notion of integration, I had a friend, Stephen, in elementary school, I think in the 5th grade. He said, I wish I was Negro. Why? He said, because Negroes are cool. He says, and you look better.
That's 50s.
Yeah, this is a Jewish kid telling me this in elementary school.
Yeah.
Now, we used to go to each other's houses, hang out, go to the Passover Seder. They come to our house.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
that's the way we grew up.
That's right.
And that was before white flight. The 50s, everybody. My neighbors had the tattoos on their forearms from the concentration camps. So everybody worked together, and everybody knew everybody's child.
Yeah.
I got home one day, and my mother said, what were you doing on such and such a street? My friend's mother, Jewish lady, saw me, and she
Yeah.
called my mother.
Yeah.
And they, just like the situation in Israel now with Hamas and Israel. A little Jewish girl said, this makes no sense. We are Arabs, we are Jews, we live together, and they're killing us both.
That's right.
She said, they're killing us both. She said, this is not right. So we have to get to a point where we get beyond the mind melt in understanding that everybody wants the same thing. You want to raise your children.
That's right.
You want the best for them. You want to be left alone. But the structure of society and government is not that way. Integration was about economics. It wasn't about, oh, we feel good about, no. They realized that they were not getting black dollars by denying people the right to come into the store and spend their money, all right? And in business school, they teach about setting up businesses in black neighborhoods because black people are major consumers. That's what integration was about, getting the dollar. And what happened with integration? Black businesses went out of business. My cousin signed with Branch Rickey. What happened to Negro
Yeah, that
Leagues?
was
The
same thing
Negro
with-
Leagues went out of
That's
business.
true. Baseball.
And we have to go back to understanding
Well,
that
you know, you
we
might
can,
mention the number game in
yeah.
Harlem.
You remember when we had the
That's
interview
when,
with Dr. Ben,
Yeah.
and he talked
He
about
brought,
coming
Cuban
here and
bringing
what was
a
the
number.
gangster's
It's
the gangster
Mickey
Bumpy Johnson?
Bumpy Johnson
Bumpy Johnson.
started the numbers game
Yeah.
in New York. All right.
Was it Bumpy Johnson? Or
He said
it was a
Bumpy
cousin
Johnson.
of
was a
Dr.
lady.
Ben. No, it came from Cuba.
It was a
Yeah.
lady. The lady.
But
that was
Bumpy
Cuba.
ran the numbers game in
Yeah,
Harlem
but I mean, it came from Cuba.
from Cuba, right?
Right.
So we need to understand that there are things that we can do ourselves without relying upon anybody to do it. I was talking with some young fellas, oh, can't find a job, the white man. Stop talking about the white man. Minister Farrakhan said this at the Million Man March. Stop talking about the white man. What are you doing?
That's right.
What are you doing to build yourself up? And I said to these brothers, I said, look down the street. There's $50,000 on the street if you can see it. You got to think out the box, brother. And it said simply, go to the elder of the block, paint that wrought iron railings on that brownstone. Paint it for free. Take your time. Be out there 7 o'clock in the morning. People going to work. They see you. They driving by. In a couple of days, they're coming to you, but you're going to charge them $500 to do their wrought iron work. Fill in the rust areas, put the primer, do everything you need to do. And I told them what to do. I said, you don't need to go to college to make $50,000 or $100,000 a year. This is what you can do in your block, in your neighborhood, and get a few guys you work together and build up a business from there. We just have to start thinking out of the box. My grandfather was a sharecropper. He never learned to read or write.
Today, everything is computerized, and if you're not computer literate...
Painting is not computerized. That's a brush.
I'm saying that the future lies in computers and being computer literate. This is what the future lies, in writing apps for the future. Everything's mechanized today. We can't think old school like we're talking because it doesn't exist anymore. We got to update ourselves. I mean, we're elders and we're thinking old. We're going back to the 40s, we're going back to the 50s, and the young are saying, look at all these old people talking about what it used to be like. Now, how do we uplift ourselves to today with electric cars? So Biden is building back and building better. Look at what he's doing.
Well, he's not doing it. Ford did.
I mean, well, we're talking about he has the idea.
No, he didn't have the idea.
Don't you give him credit for something?
What are you talking about? Electric cars have been out for how many years? Come on. I have friends that own Teslas. They had them 5 years. It's
Well,
not got
Trump
nothing to do.
wasn't promoting electric
It's got
cars.
nothing to do with Biden or him. These people, those are companies that have a vision for the future, and they put their product out. They put it out. That Asian woman did the whole plan for that car. She did the whole
Don't you
plan for that
see
car.
Who's rolling it out?
Well,
There was a black auto manufacturer in the 1920s, and he went under during the Depression.
and there was.
There was, yeah.
And talking about the youth, I'm reminded of the Soviet Union after World War II. And they had cities where the youth were orphans. They formed together in packs. And here in America, you have a similar situation, but you have mass incarceration. What the Russians did, they looked at their children as assets to the well-being of their nation. So what they did was send out, they formed think tanks consisting of various scientists and behavioral, what you call social scientists. And they sent them in to the cities to reclaim, to study those youth who were in these packs. There's a book called Soviet Education by Marenkov. It's in paperback, people can get it. And what they did was study the groups, then they developed a process for pulling them in out of their so-called savagery. We're in the same situation as opposed to just talking about we're in the same situation if we look at our children as part and parcel of a nation. We have to look at our people as a nation, a separate nation here in the wilderness of North America. And what do? When you look at yourself as a nation, no one is garbage. Everyone has something to offer. Here in this milieu of America, we see our brothers on the street, and the tendency is to look at our people as garbage, and we're not. We're victims of a system that Malcolm talked about. Who taught you to do this? Who taught you to do that? The process that Malcolm went through was knowledge of self, which is what Gil Noble hinted on. The knowledge of self leads you to discipline. When you know that you are not the lowest of the low, you want to grow up into what you are actually by nature, so that the discipline, everything that goes in the discipline, the diet, how you treat yourself, how you treat your children, how you treat your wife, how you treat your woman, all of that is part and parcel of the process that changes a Malcolm from a hustler to Malcolm as a father, and not only a father, but a surrogate father to every man that he talks to in that on 115th Street and Lenox Avenue at that time. He puts the seed of self-knowledge and self-independence into the black man. That's why the book is called Message to the Black Man in America, because we are the ones who are most asleep. When we come into ourselves, the ball game is over. When we come into ourselves, so looking at Malcolm, you have to look at the process. What happened? And when you ask what happened, then you come into the knowledge. You come into the blueprint. And it's beyond looking at a guy that was born on this particular date. He said some raw things and, ballot the bullet, and you go on home. Or you go back to sleep. The next tomorrow is Negro business as usual. And that consumer piece that you mentioned, it is a fact that we have been geared to being consumers, even though we're the best business people. The black woman is. In Africa, the black woman is the one that sells the fish when the guys come in with the boats, with the fish. The black woman, that's what I understand. I didn't see the marketplace for them. But if you go to Haiti and you go Jamaica, there's a place called the Iron Market. Nothing but black women in there selling foods and spices and whatnot. It's an amazing thing. But anyway, we're a great people, and we have to go into our history to discover who we are and appreciate who we are in terms of who our families are. That's where we should start.
We're going to take it to a little history. Run item 3. We're talking about Malcolm. You'll enjoy this one about Egypt. And we're going to talk about black history. The Egyptians were black people.
Not Berbers.
Moses and everybody in the Bible were black.
Of these statues that were found over in Egypt, Upper Egypt, of black men that were placed there or carved out of solid granite thousands of years ago.
Did you see Happy?
he didn't ever turn it
With
toward the
Dr.
camera.
J?
He kept it down. Well,
Happy?
I started to turn it toward the camera, but I didn't. I was trying to be polite. And at that point. And but today in the Los Angeles Times on page 2, they have this same picture. You look in today's Los Angeles Sunday Times, and they have a story on page 2 about this temple over in Africa. They call it Egypt, but Egypt is in Africa. And the value of which is so tremendous, it points out how the United Nations is trying to float a loan of around $30 million to save this temple from being covered by the waters that will be brought up by this Aswan Dam that they're trying to build over there. And this thing is so shrewdly done that the average Negro will look at it and read it, and because it says Egypt, he never identifies it with him or him with it. It shows you how shrewd the white man is. But when all you have to do is look at the features of the thing, and you can see, brother, they got all the features that the white man says Negroes have. But because it is associated or connected with something of such value, archaeological and historic, anthropological value, the white man tries to steal it for himself and says, no, these are white people, these aren't black people. And look at this for yourself. Look closely at it, and then, and if you notice, you'll also read in there where the United States is on record as being against putting out the money necessary to save this archaeological wonder. They're against it. And it tells you in the paper that they're against it. They want to let it go on and go beneath the waves. There was a time when America would be for preserving something like that. Because in those days, the black man was so dead mentally, he could look right at it and wouldn't know he was looking at himself. He looked right at it and wouldn't know he was looking at himself. And today, when we see a black man, we know that's a black man. Whether they call him an Egyptian, a Re-Egyptian, or an Ab-Egyptian. Don't care what they call him. All you got, if he look like you, he's the same thing as you. And this man that they have here, brothers and sisters, it has nothing but the features of a pure black man. Also, they tell me that there's an exhibition going on in Los Angeles right now somewhere about King Tut. Where is that? Some kind of museum. Where is it? Exposition. Where is it? Oh, Exposition Park. I saw King Tut's mummy tomb when I was in Egypt. And I don't know if they have the same one here, but if you go and see it, you'll find out that this King Tut, whose mummy or sarcophagus, whatever they call it, they have, it's as black as this board. And the white man knows this. Every picture that they have of King Tut, he's not brown. No, he is black, brother, just like this. And the black people who lived in that day had mastered science to such extent, had mastered chemistry to such extent that they could create colors that the dye hasn't faded to this day. Now, you know this. The white man got to paint his house every year. You got to paint yours, inside and out. And you haven't got a piece of cloth at home that won't fade if you put it in the sun. But yet these black people back there could make dye that has retained the color, same grade quality, right down to the day from 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. They were master chemists. And this tomb, and I guess this mummy, is gold encrusted. They had so much gold back then. In fact, those were the people who discovered gold. They knew what gold was. White man didn't know what gold was. And they encrusted their mummies with gold and beautiful colors and just laid them there. And finally, when the white man discovered them, he was shook up and wondered, how could these people back so long ago, supposed to be dumb, know so much about so much? Know so much about so many things that he doesn't know about today. And
Wasn't it? That was it? Gentlemen.
Hey,
See, Malcolm in the 60s,
smoking.
right? So we were well aware back then. Well, I remember watching Cleopatra and Elizabeth Taylor. And, I mean, the building of the pyramids. There's no bricks in the pyramids.
None.
All these lies that we've been told I mean, it's about time for us to wake up. I think our problem is self-esteem, and you see Africans trying to bleach themselves today. Everybody's going backwards. So we've got to get back to our center, being human. There's one race, the human race. And that's what we've got to judge people by the content of their character. Not by
I
the
would
color of their
recommend.
skin. And that includes black people in particular, because we're hung up in that same thing, light, dark, and we've got to judge a person by the content of their character. Now, through all these slain victims like Malcolm and Martin, who fought for the just cause, the elevation of the black man. Now, it's up to us elders to bring it all along. Never mind the bitterness of the past, but let's go on to our future. Now, we got a president here that's promoting electric cars. I'm not talking about who started it, but we know Trump spent 4 years polluting the planet, giving all people, that's about economics. But here we've got a man that's promoting electric cars. He got out in a hot rod yesterday, and I went to play the roll-in, but I didn't bring it with me. But it's a new day. It's a new day. So I found it interesting, like you said, there's a Chinese woman engineer at Ford that's been there 20 years working on it, a Chinese woman. Her two parents came here when she was 8, and both of them engineers. So we're talking about the American dream. Now, it's funny, we're competing with China on electric cars, and here we've got a Chinese person engineering a woman at that. So this is what the rise of the female this year, the rise of the black female. Our nurturers, who we come from, our mothers. We all come from the womb. So what say you, Leroy?
I would like to recommend to the folks in the audience who want to begin to get a knowledge of themselves and pass that information on to their children, to get Superman to Man by J.A. Rogers. And 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro by J.A. Rogers. Any book by J.A. Rogers, but Superman to Man is a fascinating book. There's a brother on 125th Street, Jack Felder's son.
What does it talk about?
I'm sorry.
Superman to Man.
Superman to Man is exactly what it talks about. It talks about a Pullman car porter on a train with Senator, white supremacist senator from Missouri, I think. So they have to travel days going across country. And every chance the senator gets, he puts down black people. And the Pullman car porter takes it as long as he could, and this is on a daily basis. Then he goes into a notebook and starts repudiating what the senator said. And every day, the way the book is constructed, you will read it day to day to day, because it's what's going to happen next. What's the brother going to come back with, and his retort, his responses to the senator is factual. He goes into the sources. That's what it is. The book is filled with sources. It's a fascinating book. After you read that book, you want to get into more information. J. Rogers, World's Great Men of Color.
Yeah.
The World's Great Men of Color,
Men of
1
Color.
and 2.
2, right.
Has male and female in
Yes.
it. And the book, J. Rogers, Bad Man.
We all know that Leroy has a program at 10:30 on Mondays.
It's 10:30 on Monday, and I'm also on the internet, brotherleroy.org.
And you
Brother
have
Leroy, that's
you
where
have a- Leroy has
interviews
a-
I've done with Dr. Bowles and others
right.
are listed there.
But you have a program called Books That Matter.
Books That Matter, and the other one is The Wisdom Table.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Let's get back to Malcolm. I want to play one more. When a month before Malcolm died. Now we know his attitude towards white people before his death, but just before his change, he went to Mecca, and Professor Smalls talks about that, how he not changed, but he knew white Muslims in Boston. There was a mosque across the street from Sister Ella, his sister Ella. So he knew that there were white Muslims. But Malcolm came back saying that if white people had exposed themselves to the Muslim religion, they wouldn't be as white supremacists as they are. Is that correct? Is that what Malcolm said afterwards? He came back from Mecca?
I didn't hear that part, but today I understand that statement.
Mm-hmm.
When Malcolm sent a letter, as I recall, it was a letter. It turned out to be a front page story in the New York Times,
Right.
and with a photo of him, I think on a camel, and the headline was whatever it was. It benefited the writers of that story, and personally, I was disappointed. I said, no, wait a minute, what's going on here? I'd listened to Malcolm on WLIB radio. That's where I was introduced to Malcolm. He would debate with Wilkins and the man Foreman and Whitney Young, and there would be a round table discussion, and Malcolm would be wiping them out.
Yeah.
Okay, but as I came into the nation and began to get an understanding of just what Islam is. You see, when you hear it, as an outsider, you're very narrow, or I was very narrow. Okay, this is what it is. But when you come into the knowledge, it's that broad, and you are duty bound to take the knowledge that you get to other corners.
Right.
And your family, if they listen. And it's not a matter of browbeating people, it's a matter of sharing the information. And ultimately you find that there's one God,
Right.
and ultimately you find that the criteria of a human being is common among all people. How you treat people, you want to be treated the
Content
same
of
way.
character.
You treat those, you treat people the way you want to be treated, and that's the law, the universal law of getting along.
That God is real.
God is super real.
All right.
Yep.
All right, let me play this one piece, and I always found this interesting. This is a month and a half before he died. Play item 4, please. You know this one. He speaks at Oxford.
Yep.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
So, now what is he saying?
You know,
Ballad of the bullet?
I don't think it's about physical confrontation is a last resort. But you should take every effort to bring about change before you go to physical confrontation.
Exactly.
You can't let emotion override thinking and logic. Because as Professor Jeffrey says, you got to analyze it. You got to break it down.
System analysis.
System analysis. In Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War, he says you have to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and you need to know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses.
Always.
You don't go into Russia in November, December looking to win a battle because you're not coming out. So what he's saying there is that collectively, and I had to break this down to a guy after 9/11 who thought that, he said, oh, you know, we got to save our country. I said, no, you save your country. I just live here. His thing was that I was talking about radicalism. I said, look, all the terms that you all use, don't come to me with that. I gave him some material to read, and the light went on. And I told him, I said, unless people like you understand that you put your pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else, and the fact that I'm black and you're white doesn't mean anything to the people that are running the show, and you understand that you're as tertiary as I am to them. Don't assume that because you're white, you're here and I'm there. You're not.
White supremacy.
Look at Donald Trump and the way that he deals with the people that look up to him. And he doesn't care about them. And the ignorant fact is that they can't even see it. But the thing is that what Malcolm was saying, he'll work with anybody to change this corrupt system.
And that's exactly what we
power
have to do.
corrupts and absolute power corrupts.
And that's exactly
absolutely.
what we need to do, starting right here. Work with anybody. Never mind what color they are, as long as they have they're human.
We saw it with the George Floyd situation. You saw white people, Latinos, everybody came out unified
I saw
in
a
that
Chinese
effort.
guy that was ashamed of the officer standing up there. Another officer.
I saw that.
You
Yes.
see that?
He said he was
"I
Asian. He was ashamed."
Why would you let that happen? So this is a signal from the Almighty, as far as I can see. See, George Floyd showed us that there was no color thing. They were fighting over. They knew each other, and they were fighting over George going out with his girlfriend. That was revenge killing. But yet everybody saw it on tape. The policemen involved, there was 2 rookies there, one Chinese, one black, and
And
2
another guy.
white. And the other white guy was a rookie. So there was a coalition there. The color there was blue. And that's what we got to fight. There's one race, the human race, and until we learn that, the rest is nonsense. Now, Malcolm even taught us that. He said, I'll work with anybody. And at the beginning, him and Martin were bumping heads. Martin was a punk. You cater to white people. Like like Gil said, we didn't confront them, we worked around them. I always thought it was stupid, racism. I just thought it was a joke. I know it was just so obnoxious because I couldn't understand it. So I never got bitter about it. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous. Okay? So, and it is, come to find out. What is it?
But
What's
how
the
it
difference?
affects people, the damage that it does to people psychologically in talking, I keep going back to the psychological damage. Philando Castile is murdered before his little girl. The brother who was shot 7 times in front of his 3 sons in the car. George Floyd's little girl. Sean Bell's children. Matter of fact, his birthday was yesterday. Sean Bell would have been 38 yesterday.
Yeah, that was 51 shots.
All of the families, the psychological damage. Stop and frisk brought and
That's right.
evinced psychological
That's right.
damage upon
White
a
supremacy.
million
That's
young
right.
black
Right.
and Latino fellas in
Right.
this city.
Right.
And I went over to a brother once. They went through his car. And I was in my car. I saw it. I parked my car, and I went over to him. I said, what the cop stop you? He says, man, I don't know. They told me to pull over. I pull over. You know, West Indian guy. I gave him my card. I said, listen, everything they did was illegal. I will help you. He said, no, man, forget it, man. Forget it. I can't help somebody like that. Because he's under the notion and idea that they're the police and there's nothing he can do about it.
That's it.
And young fellas constantly were being stopped and harassed. People are going out, they're afraid of what, that's psychological damage. That's what
right.
racism is about. I don't give a damn
That's
about a
right.
cup of coffee in a restaurant.
Right.
I don't need to sit with white people. I don't need to sit with any kind of people regarding a cup of coffee. But when you are inflicting psychological, emotional, educational, financial, any kind of damage, and even medical damage to people,
Medical.
because there's racism,
is right.
racism in everything, and that's what I tell students when I'm lecturing. If you're not thinking about what you're going to do to lessen the negative impact of what it is you want to do in life as it relates to black people, you're not fit to be here. Everything impacts upon the poor. Everything.
Yeah.
And even poor white people need to understand that, because they've been used as guinea pigs by this government in testing and research
That's
of radioactive materials. They
That's
did it to poor white women in Appalachia.
And the way we get out of this is the God in me loves the God in you. And stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist experience. Now we've just exposed you all to Malcolm's birthday. Happy birthday, Malcolm.
Happy birthday.
But we continue to bring out the information and solutions to the problem of racism and white supremacy. That's a problem in America, and it'll affect us all. But you have to uplift yourself and realize that God is real and stay righteous in your heart. Stay tuned for more. The God in me still loves the God in you. Amen.
Amen.
Peace, power to the people. God bless. Oh, we got a minute for the Bronx. I forget.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of being on the Gilchrist Experience. And I'm running into people every week who have seen the show and appreciate the work that's been done over the years.
We've been here since,
20-something years, man.
yeah, 22, 23. Since the place opened, since Manhattan neighborhood opened. I was here when we were on 23rd
Oh,
Street.
right.
23rd Street in 97. I think we got here in 98. Power to the people.
Thank you.
All right? We'll be back next week for more. I'm going to talk more about what's happening in the country, the American Biden's program to rebuild America. Stay tuned.
Build back better, right?
Build back better.
better.
He's got some great...